Hi, I'm Jason, and I'm going to continue with my personal testimony covering the past year that I've spent in our house church. Now, the last time I talked, I explained that I'm dealing with depression and grief. I also mentioned that about a certain period last summer, when I stepped out in faith and some amazing events resulted. And today I'm going to cover some of that. Whilst I spend a lot of time explaining my circumstances and my situation, it's Jesus who has taken what I did and made the good out of it, made the wonderful things happen, and the glory belongs to him and not to me. So early last summer, I started going to counselling, mainly to help me address my mental health. Through that, I discovered that I'd been suppressing the grief about an ended relationship. It was explained to me that we can't suppress one of our emotions without impacting the others. In stopping myself experiencing the sadness and the loss, I was suppressing my ability to experience joy and peace and other things. And in part, this was contributing to my depression. When this came to light, my counsellor suggested that I had to live through and experience the grief. I was immediately frightened by that. And as we discussed doing it and what it might involve, I was in tears, and it was clear it was something that I didn't want to do. I knew how dreadful it was going to be. Directly after the breakup, I'd spent a couple of months living in that grief. And facing the truth that she'd left was too hard for me to cope with. The very reason why I'd squashed it, it was too painful for me to bear. And I didn't want to go back there. And as I drove home, I was talking out loud to Jesus about it, saying things like, I can't go through that pain again. It wasn't healthy. That wasn't good for me. Jesus, this can't be right. You can't want me to go through all that again. I know that you can heal me. So, I've been hoping for that for months now. Why can't you just heal me? And when I got home, I continued the conversation in the same vein, discussing it out loud with Jesus. I also read the Bible, looked at the notes I'd taken during counselling and at my journal. And as I did that, I was prompted to remember not to react, like Peter is often described as doing in the Bible, but to respond. So I tried to step back from my gut reaction and think it through more objectively. And after much deliberation, I still couldn't believe, and I use this phraseology deliberately, I still couldn't believe that my loving Father God would want me to hurt so much again. Everything I'd learnt and discovered to this point in my counselling had not contradicted any Bible readings or Bible studies or talks I'd listened to. Indeed, quite the opposite. One always reinforced the other. But this living in the grief, this was to me the equal of choosing to hurt myself. And I was questioning it. I didn't think it was right. So rather than the general chat that I was having, I formulated a single prayer, a single appeal. Jesus, if I must do this because it's what's best for me, I need you to confirm it very clearly to me. I cannot do it unless I know that you are behind it, that you are in it. Now, I didn't use the words, show me in black and white, but that's how clear I wanted it to be. And I guess I was hoping there'd be a biblical 101 on dealing with grief in 5 easy lessons, or preferably less. Now, all this took place during a Thursday, during the morning, the afternoon and the evening, a Thursday in August. And this is a rhetorical question, but how do you think that God handled my appeal? Well, here's a clue. You'll notice that the first bullet point on the slide is 3/4 of the way down the page. There's some blanks to be filled in before that Thursday. So we need to go back a couple of weeks before then to see where the answer started from. But before I do that, I need to explain something else. I used to love riding my motorbike. It wasn't unknown for me to go and ride more than 600 miles in one day around the glorious roads of Wales. And I adored doing that. It was the opposite of anxiety to me. It's where I got my peace. It's where I de-stressed. It's where I got out and enjoyed God's creation. Yeah, but last summer, due to my mental health, the connection with the other person who'd left, I struggled to open the garage door, let alone get my bike out of the garage. I couldn't face doing that. It was the very manifestation of anxiety in me. Nothing to do with my physical ability to ride. I just couldn't face doing it. It was all to do with the connection to the relationship. And the relevance of this will become obvious in a moment. So let's go back to the blanks before that Thursday. Early in July, it had become clear to me that I needed to do something other than just sit at home. I needed a purpose. And how I discovered that is another story. A few days later, my counsellor also suggested I needed to do something. And knowing how much I had loved riding my motorbike, suggested I explore how I could take a short ride, but rather than just riding for the sake of it, have reason to go for that ride, have a purpose to ride. That was her words, not mine. Now, in looking around at what I might be able to do, I was taking into account the state of my mental health, and as a result I decided it had to be connected to my faith. And the reason for this is I wanted to feel safe. And again, we'll touch on that very soon. My searching resulted in me finding the Christian Motorcycle Association, an organisation I was unaware of until this point. And they have a branch that meets at North Camp Methodist Church once a month. Their next meeting was going to be a week and a half away on the 17th of July. And I thought, I'll attempt to go there, hoping it might provide a safe environment because it was Christian based. And it wasn't very far away. I was still unsettled about this, and I prayed and asked for help during the days prior. And come the evening, I was still very anxious about it. And I really had to fight my feelings because what I wanted to do was go back into the house and stay safe. I'd be alone, but I'd be safe. And I mentioned on my last talk that I felt the same way coming to our house on occasions. But this was so much stronger. Even so, I did as I did on those Sunday mornings. I fought my feelings, hoping, trusting that God was going to be involved and would get me through it. So I chose to take an uncomfortable step, choosing to open the garage door, get my bike out and start riding it. To me, it was absurd how challenging it was to ride 7 miles, given how I used to go 600 miles without a second thought. Yet I did make it to North Camp. It was tough, but it turned out to be worth it. When I got there, I was warmly welcomed, and it felt like it did and still does when I come to our house, like it did on those tough Sunday mornings. Non-judgmental, friendly, inviting. It was as if I was back in a family, and these were with complete strangers. I felt safe. I wasn't exactly at peace, but other than being here at our house, it was the most peaceful I'd been in public since the breakup. So it was a very positive evening. 3 people prayed for me, and I even ended up laughing out loud for the first time in months. I was truly blessed, and I rode home praising God. And during that evening, I was invited to go to a bike show with some of the members of the CMA. And that was going to be a few weeks later. Now, I wouldn't normally go to a bike show. It's not the kind of thing I would do, even when I didn't have anxiety. When I was aware of this bike show, I'd actually ridden through the town a few years prior. I didn't stop, I was going somewhere else. It didn't take my interest. But so I was aware how big this bike show was. The town closes the roads, the bikes are parked on the pavements and on the verges and so on. And there's merchandise stores and food stands. It's a huge event. And the way that the CMA people were talking about it, or possibly better to say, the way I interpreted it, I thought they were going to be an active outreach. Go and set up a stall and be a Christian storefront at the show, especially as they mentioned being based at a church in the town centre. And I thought to myself, well, that would give me a purpose to go for a ride and to serve God, spread the gospel. So not only was that having a purpose to do it, but it would also continue with the theme, to reap first I had to sow, which I mentioned in my last talk. It did take some more steps of courage, but I did ride to the show with some of the CMA members. Not their fault, but I didn't enjoy the ride there. I didn't enjoy walking around the show. I was on edge and I was anxious the entire time. And it turned out it wasn't an active outreach either. So, at least not how I pictured it being. So my reason for going didn't provide me any solace either. And I was questioning why I was there. The truth is, I was annoyed at God. I remember mumbling and thinking, I've taken some courageous steps to get here, to serve you. And all I have to show for it is increased anxiety. What are you doing? Why am I here? What's this all about, God? It took all my energy, my concentration, all the lessons and coping mechanisms I'd learnt at counselling, not to break down in the street. And it was serious enough that my anxiety made me, I didn't think I was going to be calm enough to ride home. And then I found myself sat at a table on my own in the church garden, having a drink. And a lady came and sat at the same table. And I decided to start a conversation with her, thinking, here's an opportunity for some outreach. Disappointingly, she was already a Christian and a member of that church. So our conversation quickly got onto our faith. We talked for over an hour, and her testimony really resonated with me. And as we talked, it was obvious that Jesus was real to her. It shone out of her in the way that she spoke of him. He was so personal to her. And I knew that I didn't know him or love him in the way that she evidently did, and I'm sure still does. I asked her how she came to love Jesus so much and so personally. And that's not an easy question to answer, not quickly, but she did. She recommended a book to me. And she said that this book, Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldridge, changed the way that she thought of and understood about Jesus and who Jesus is. And it turns out that that conversation and that book is why I was at the bike show. But I didn't know that at the time. Another result of the conversation was I found my anxiety had been greatly reduced. So I got home safely and I ordered the book. The book arrived and I started reading it the following Tuesday morning. And immediately it got my interest. In those 2 days before the Thursday, the book had already got me thinking about Jesus in a different way, starting to see him more personally than I had previously. So in part, it was why I had approached him with my Thursday appeal in the way I had. In a less religious or less holy, probably best to say a less formal way than I had previously. Now it's important to understand that the book is about who Jesus is, his character, his personality, his humanity. It's not a book about mental health. Even so, it is how God answered my mental health question. That petition of, I need to know that you are behind it, that you are in this. The Friday morning after the appeal, I woke up. It was early. The question of the grief was still at the fore of my mind, and it was still troubling me. So to distract myself, I picked up and continued to read Beautiful Outlaw, because it was a pleasing read. It comforted me. It was soothing. And 2 paragraphs after I started reading, the author quoted a passage from another Christian author's book. And this is what I read. Truth or reality is avoided when it is painful. We can revise our maps only when we have the discipline to overcome that pain. To have such discipline, we must be totally dedicated to truth. That is to say, we must always hold truth, as best we can determine it, to be more important, more vital to our self-interest than our comfort. Conversely, we must always consider our personal discomfort relatively unimportant and indeed even welcome it in the service of the search for truth. Mental health is an ongoing process of dedication to reality at all costs. Well, so much for the soothing. I sat there absolutely staggered, because there, in black and white, in a book about Jesus, was my answer. You are avoiding the truth of your life because it is painful. But that truth is important for you to face. It couldn't have been made any clearer to me. Now, that paragraph is not my message to anyone. It was the answer to my question, my circumstances at that time. What I'm trying to convey is this: that 18 days before I read that passage, before I chose to take that step of faith to get my bike out of the garage, if I hadn't have done that, if I hadn't have taken that uncomfortable step, Jesus would not have been able to get me to that bike show. I mean, no way would I have gone on my own. And if I hadn't have gone to the bike show, I wouldn't have spoken to that lady. I wouldn't have been made aware of the book. Again, until she mentioned it, I'd never heard of this book. And I wouldn't have been reading that paragraph the morning after I asked about the truth of my situation. I don't believe that this sequence of events was a coincidence. I believe that was Jesus carrying out some serious logistics. To me, that is miraculous. Even before I asked the question, he'd set things in motion to answer my question. Yeah, I had to take that first uncomfortable step, but look at what Jesus did as a result. So I got my answer, but I was still faced with another uncomfortable choice. I could continue to ignore the grief and live as I was, withdrawn, numb, in the artificial safety that I'd created, or I could face up to the uncomfortable truth, the truth of my life, and experience the grief and the heartbreak. I chose to experience the grief because Jesus had clearly shown me that he was in it, he'd be there. I mean, how else would I have got hold of that book and that answer in black and white? In addition, there was what I was learning about Jesus from that same book. His understanding of being human, his love for me, how he cared for me. And these combined gave me the courage to trust and confront my grief. Now, as I've prepared this talk, I've considered stopping here because the next bit is tough for me to say. But I'm going to carry on and talk about what's happened since I made that choice. I'd like to say that confronting the truth was easy and that I'm better now, but neither are the case. Experiencing the grief has been the hardest thing that I have ever had to do. At times it got so dark that I doubted Jesus was with me, so dark that I gave up trusting and lost my faith in him. So dark at times I was close to giving up on life. But there has always been a reading or a talk or a prayer or a Christian song, and possibly most importantly, somebody, someone there at the right moment to encourage me not to give up. Now, I'm still a little bit uncomfortable in the grief, but it's a little less unpleasant. It happens less often and it doesn't last for as long. I can and I do acknowledge that my situation has improved greatly. I can see how far I've come how much progress has been made, and how much better of a place I'm in now than I was a year ago, or during the summer, or at Christmas, or even in February. Another but it is only with hindsight that I know Jesus has been with me throughout it all. There have been many days when I doubted and I felt overwhelmingly sad and alone. But I believe that's the depression. That was my mental health blinding me. Because something that has gradually changed is this. There are still low times, and I still feel alone. I still feel sad. But whereas previously I doubted and I raged and I asked, "Where are you? What are you doing?" Now I know he is still there, even if I can't feel his presence. He has shown me that he is worthy of the trust that I have put in him. I can now trust him more. It started so small. I said to somebody a few weeks ago, it was like my faith was a handful of water and it was just draining away. But it has grown since then. Jesus is healing me, not instantly as I wanted, and not yet fully. And I think I've come to something of an understanding on why that healing wasn't instant. And that is to do with having to go through the long haul. Because having to fight to face my grief, I have had to trust Jesus and learn what faith really is. And doing that has strengthened both. And I have still much growth to do in those areas. And yet it's been tough. And I do still wish it would end. But I also know that Jesus has been in that fire with me. So I'm going to continue to trust. And another positive. Just a few weeks back, I was able to ride around Wales on my own for 3 days without any significant anxiety. And that's a huge blessing. And I thank you, Jesus. I love you for that. I need to wrap this up. Jesus, thank you for being my saviour and going through all that you had to endure to gift me that salvation. I love you for doing that. And thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you that you have never abandoned me and that you never will. I love you so much for doing that. Well, thank you for listening.